Hello, and thank you for watching this video. I'm not super excited about doing a voiceover on this video. All my videos so far have been writing captions, so I'm going to give it a whirl. Today on the bench we've got an Illinois 16S 21 joule railroad grade pocket watch. It is a Model A Lincoln. I got it from a friend of mine who's a veteran, and it was his grandfather's, and his grandfather used to use it every single day when he worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. I put it on the time grapher. It seemed like it was running pretty well, so I figured I would give it a clean and a lube. I would shine up the case, and I've got some other surprises in store for him. The dial looks in pretty good shape. I only saw one or two cracks in the dial, which didn't seem to be a big deal. They should clean up quite nicely. This is what the movement looks like with the back off. I'm going to remove the two case screws and then pull out the crown, and the watch should fall right out of the case. While I'm doing this, I figured I would tell you a little bit about the pocket watches for veterans fund that I've got. I started a GoFundMe site that allows me to use the money to buy parts to fix veterans' pocket watches. I donate my time, and I use the money to buy any extra movements or parts needed in order to fix whatever might be wrong with the watches. When I send it back to the veterans, usually it's better off than when it started. There's a link in the description below to the GoFundMe site. Every dollar helps. Alright, so I'm going to flip the movement over, and I'm going to line the hands up in preparation for pulling the hands off. In order to not mess up the dial, I know there's not a huge chance of messing up an enamel dial like this, but I like to take every precaution possible. So I put a little plastic bag over top of it, and I use these levers to pull the hands off. I'll take the hands, store them in a safe place. One thing I noticed while pulling the second hand off is that there is a large amount of fuzz on the bottom of the hand. So I'm going to make sure that's cleaned off before it gets reinstalled. I'm going to remove the three case screws, or loosen them. Now I'm going to pull off all of the parts that could fall off when I flip the watch movement over, including the cannon pinion. I'm going to use this nice little cannon pinion tool I bought on eBay to pull the cannon pinion off. I pull that off to make sure the center gear, or the center wheel, comes out when disassembling the other side. Usually I spend a couple minutes checking out the functionality on the dial side before I flip it over, just so I can get an idea of what it looks like, what it's supposed to do, how it's supposed to function, and whether everything's functioning correctly. This watch is a lever set watch, so in order to set the watch you have to pop up that little lever on the top, and then it'll allow you to set the hands. This was a major function of the railroad grade pocket watches, so they didn't accidentally get set by mistake to a different time. As I flip the watch over, I'm going to let down the mainspring by giving a little twist and then moving the click out of the way, and then slowly let the power out of the pocket watch. I usually wait until the balance slows down and stops, and then I know I'm good to remove the balance. The balance comes out pretty easily. It's just one screw. And then I will use a screwdriver to pry up the balance, or my tweezers. In this case, I'm using a screwdriver. I'll get it loose, and then I'll use the tweezers to get it the rest of the way. I try to be very careful of the hairspring to make sure I don't stress it or bend it while taking the balance out. Now I'm going to remove the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel and the click. This right here is the crown wheel. The screw is reverse threaded, and this is the ratchet wheel. This is normal thread. While I'm taking the parts out, I usually try to make sure I get an idea of which screws go back in which holes. These screws are fairly easy because the ratchet wheel screw is usually much bigger than, the crown wheel screw is usually much larger than the ratchet wheel. There's the ratchet wheel. Next comes the click. I'll pull that out. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove the click spring. I'm going to do a similar deal for the click spring as I did for the hands, but for a different reason. I want to make sure the click spring doesn't go shooting across my room and that I won't spend the next 2 hours looking for it, because most of these click springs are very unique and you can't just get another one without getting a donor movement. I'm using the smallest size screwdriver I have to pry it out of the little notch that it's in. Once all the tension's off the spring, it's pretty easy to pull it out, and I'll store it with the rest of the parts. Now, while taking, this is the barrel bridge that I'm going to take off next. The barrel bridge has 3 screws, which while I was inspecting it, it seems 2 of the screws are the same, but one of them looks much different than the others. I think at some point one of the screws must have gotten lost by a previous watch maker while repairing, and they put a random screw in there that fit. So here I go again, removing the 3rd screw in the barrel bridge. The reason this is called the barrel bridge is because it's the part that goes over top the barrel and holds the barrel in place. The screw didn't seem to want to come out, so I had to give it a few extra turns before it finally came free. There we go. And this was the ugly duckling screw. I actually bought a pack of new old stock screws for this movement, and I will be replacing that screw with one that looks a lot like the others. gently prying up the barrel bridge, making sure to bring it directly up off of the movement in order to not bend any of the pivots. Now I'm going to remove the train bridge, I believe this is called. Doing the exact same thing, I'm going to pull out the last screw and then I'm going to gently pry up the edge in a couple different places in order to have it come directly out. It's very important not to pull this off aggressively. All the pivots are very easily bent. Now there's the center wheel. That's the wheel that your hands sit on. That's the second wheel, which I believe that's the maybe fourth wheel. I still don't know the names of all the wheels yet. I do know that's the escape wheel. And I believe I think this is the fourth wheel. The last thing I'm going to take out is the barrel. And we're almost done removing all the parts on this side of the watch. The last thing to go is the pallet fork bridge and the pallet fork. This is another piece that you have to be very careful when removing because the pivots are very delicate on the pallet fork. So similar to the other bridges, I'm going to remove the screws and then I'm going to use a screwdriver to kind of pry up on it. Now you'll see this one comes right off, which is great. Usually they get stuck and the pallet fork gets stuck inside of them because somebody put in an overabundance of oil and it's all dried up and everything is just kind of stuck together. But in this case, it looked pretty good. There's the pallet fork. So flipping the movement over, we're going to remove the keyless works. This is the part, this is the gear that sets the watch. And the screws on this are very, very tiny. So you want to be very careful when removing this because you don't want to lose these screws. Now while I go ahead and remove the rest of the parts on the keyless works, I will go ahead and talk a little bit about how I got into watch repair. I was watching another YouTuber repair a watch on a very popular YouTube channel. And after watching a bunch of their videos, I said, hey, I wonder if I can do that. And I got into pretty much watching as many watch videos as I could for about a month. I have very bad ADD, so I have to be doing things all the time. So I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy a set of screwdrivers and I'm going to buy some tweezers and I'm going to see what I can do. And I went out to eBay and bought probably about 50 Russian watch movements, manual Russian watch movements, and started taking them apart and trying to put them back together in better shape than when I got them. So after taking a whole bunch of Russian watches apart, my uncle over Easter gave me his $15,000 Rolex and said, "Hey, can you fix this?" And like any good watchmaker, amateur hobbyist like I said, yes, of course I can. So I ended up taking the whole entire thing apart, buying all the parts for it, and putting it back together, and it actually worked out pretty well. So that was probably my first success as a watchmaker slash hobbyist, was taking apart that watch, documenting everything, taking pictures, and then putting it back together with the new parts and having it work better than when I started. Alright, that's pretty much it for the watch disassembly. We're going to go into the pre-cleaning process, and I sped this up because super boring. But basically all I'm doing is using a nylon brush and naphtha and trying to get as much dirt off of it as I possibly can to make it look nice and break up all that grease. Previously I've used 99% isopropyl alcohol to do this. But I decided to go out and get myself a bottle of naphtha and see if it worked any better. The jury's still out. I have no idea. It seemed to work about the same. The only difference in the naphtha is it seems like it makes my gloves deform and look horrible. As you can see right there. It's like melting the glove as I'm trying to clean the watch parts. So basically what I do for the pre-cleaning, and this is a fiberglass, I guess, scratch pen. This helps break up any rust or any yuckiness on it. I'm not super thrilled with how this works because it drops little fiberglass pieces all inside your cleaning agent and whatever you're using, so I don't like to use them unless I absolutely have to. But basically I'll clean the main plate and all the bridges this way, and I'll go ahead and peg out all the jewels and try to get it as clean as I possibly can before I stick it into my cleaning cycle. So that's the end of the cleaning, the pre-cleaning, and I'm going to go through my cleaning cycle. Now that the watch is back from cleaning, first thing I do when it gets back from cleaning is I'm going to put the mainspring back into the mainspring barrel. Now I go ahead and grease the inside or oil the inside of the barrel with some Bergeron oil. I think it's HP 1300. And I've already wiped down the inside. I've already wiped down the mainspring with Bergeron 8217. I wound it in my mainspring winder, and I'm going to make sure that the little notches line up in the hole. That's why I keep the little tail sticking out there. If it was an automatic watch, I would have it wound completely inside the mainspring winder. But I like to line them up, and there we go. It's lined up. Now I'm going to push it in there, and we're good. Now I'm going to use a vise to hold the arbor and put the arbor in place. I found that this is the easiest way to get the arbor in place. I think this is called a press vise. You basically press that little ring and it tightens around the vise. I've tried all sorts of pin vices, but this, to me, is the best one that I've tried. Now, I'll use some more HP 1300 and put a little on the top. As you can see, it goes right in. And then I'm going to put some HP 1300 on the arbor itself. And then I'm going to snap the top back on. I know some people use a tool, but I find on these larger size pocket watches, it's just as easy to use your fingers to snap the lid back on the barrel as it is to use the tool to do it. So rather than pull the tool out of my drawer, I will just snap the top of the barrel on with my fingers. Now for this pocket watch, I decided to use the same mainspring that came with the pocket watch. When I pulled it out, it didn't seem like it was bent. It didn't seem like it was in bad condition. And when I did my initial time graph on it, the amplitude was somewhere around 325. So I figured it was safe to reuse the mainspring rather than replacing it. And the reason why I don't have any audio is because typically when I'm doing a service on a watch, I'm usually watching a television show. So I don't get any copyright violations. I just mute the sound. Alright, so now it's time to start putting the watch back together. The first thing I'm going to do, actually, it's time to clean the jewels. I forgot there were 3 cap jewels on this main plate and 1 cap jewel on the bridge, the train bridge. So typically I will pull the jewels out, and I try to do a decent job of filming this, but it's always one of the more difficult things to film. This and trying to put lube on the pallet fork are the 2 things that I still have a difficulty doing. So I'm going to try to show you how I do this. You're going to get some video of this in the beginning, and then I'm going to switch over to my microscope. I do everything under a microscope because my eyes aren't the best. So that's why sometimes the camera angles are a little bit goofy for me, because I enjoy using my microscope for pretty much everything. So right here I'm going to push the jewel out. These guys were a little bit stuck. They were all kind of tight. And one thing I will say, that it's super important to dress your tweezers when working on watch movements. As you can see, I pretty much dress my tweezers before I work on any watch movement. And one day I'll put a video out on how I dress my tweezers. So we're going to go over to the microscope footage. These are what the 2 jewels look like. There's 2, one of them, and the way I tell them apart is this one has a little lip on it, so that's always the first jewel that goes in, and it's got a hole through it. And then the second one, you can see right there where the screws go, and that's always the top jewel. So I'm going to clean this with some pegwood, and as I clean it with pegwood, I dip it into hexane, and then I clean it again until it's super shiny. I I go ahead and I push the jewel back in after cleaning it, and I'm going to put a little drop of oil on the top, flip it over, try to line up where the screw holes go, and push it down into place. I didn't do all the jewels because it would have taken too long to film all the jewels, and this was already a 50-minute video. So I decided to do one jewel, and then you guys can imagine me doing all three. So I want you to remember this jewel, because after I put the whole entire movement back together, I was having an issue. That's the jewel that goes to the escape wheel. I was having an issue with the escape wheel moving correctly. And I ended up having to take the entire movement apart after putting it together and do troubleshooting on why the gears weren't moving correctly, or the train of wheels wasn't moving correctly. So I'm going to put together the winding works right now. I'm using a little bit of grease on the winding stem. This is going to be Bergeron 9504, that's the blue grease. And I'm going to put a little on both the round part and the square part. Now this is probably too much grease, but sometimes I feel like in the winding works you can never have too much grease. So this part goes there, and then that goes there. And I'm sure all these have technical names for these parts, but right now while I'm doing the voiceover for this video, I cannot remember what they are. I forgot to put a little bit of grease in the little valley right there, and also where the winding stem goes, sticks almost out of the plate. So I put a little bit in there, and then I will replace the plate. Sorry, the winding stem. This, compared to some other Elgin models and Waltham models, was very easy to put back together. So there's the center wheel. I'm going to go ahead and oil that. I just oil a little bit right up here at the tip where it rides on the jewel. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in. I'm going to put some oil where the barrel bridge sticks through the main plate. I put the fourth wheel in right there. I think I may have edited that out by accident. This is the barrel. Now, on this particular movement, the barrel bridge and the main wheel have to be put in before the train bridge goes in, because the train bridge covers the main wheel, the center wheel, a little bit, and you can't get that out, and you can't get it in once the train bridge is in. So it's got to go back in this order. Now for me, I'm going to fidget with this for a few minutes, and you'll see it'll pop into place right there. Yep, there it goes. So once that pops into place, you're good to go. I'm going to put one screw in it just to make sure it doesn't pop out anywhere, but it's important I don't tighten the screw down all the way. I just simply kind of hand tighten the screw very loosely, just to make sure that nothing's bound up and nothing gets broken. You'd be surprised at how fast some of these jewels can get broken. Ask me how I know. And it's hard to test the functionality right now because that other gear is in the way, and since it's not held in place with the jewel, it moves all over the place. So here's the hand that drives the seconds gear, or the seconds hand, and I'm going to put that in the hole, and all these are going to get oiled after the fact. Goes. Then the last one that's going to go in is going to be the escape wheel. So I'm going to put the escape wheel in, and then I'm going to spend about 5 minutes trying to get the train wheel bridge into place, which I think I sped up on the video so you didn't have to watch it, because sometimes it can be painful. More painful than looking at my ugly fingernails. Another thing that's very difficult while I'm putting this into place is trying to film all this. I'm left-handed, so a lot of it is very odd for me to keep it in the camera angle, give you guys a good view of what's going on, and yet still try to see and move and get things in the place that they need to go. So that's a lot of the struggle. And I'm still pretty new at this, especially the videoing part. So a lot of the times my fingers get in the way and things are in the way. But all I'm doing right now is I'm looking down my microscope and I'm looking through the top of the jewel hole at high magnification, and I'm trying to see where I got to move the gears in order to get all the holes to line up. With a microscope, it's super easy to see when all the holes line up. So in this case, I'm going to put one screw in, and then I'm going to go ahead and test the functionality. And as you'll see, the functionality is pretty bad. I'm not even sure if I show it, but I can tell you that when I tried to move the train of gears, it wasn't going to move. So I did a little video of how I troubleshoot. So what I do is I put one gear in at a time. And in this case, the problem with the escape wheel, I did not set the jewel far good enough when I initially put it in. So basically what I ended up having to do is pull the bottom jewel back out of the main plate and then re-oil it and put it back in using my staking set to make sure it was pushed as far down as I possibly could. But I still wasn't convinced that that was going to fix everything, so I went ahead and I checked every single gear. So the process is long and arduous a little bit, but it's basically put the plate on, screw it down, check the movement, see if the gear is moving correctly. You want it to spin freely, and when it comes to a stop, you don't want it to come to an abrupt stop. You just want it to kind of glide to a stop. So that's what I'm doing here. And this is the wheel that the second hand rides on. I think it's the third wheel or the fourth wheel. If anybody knows, put it in the comment section. So that one's in there. I didn't have to make any adjustments to this wheel. It seemed to just want to spin pretty good as is. I'm blowing it with a little air blower. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull the bridge back off, put the last gear in. I think I sped this up, do the exact same thing. When it spins okay, I was ready to put the watch back together. Oh, I did want to point out that the reason why I'm putting this in my staking block, all the gears in my staking block, because once you put them in, and this typically is only for captijoules, but once you stick them in and the pivots stick up into the capjoule, if you put them down, you lay them on any surface, they can pick up dust and grit and grime, and then when you put them back into the movement, it can create grinding paste. So what I do is, rather than sitting the gears down on anything, I put them in my staking block so that nothing's touching the top or the bottom pivot, and that usually does the trick. Ask me how I know that. So this is the last one. This is the last wheel. I don't want to give up any spoilers, but I think this one's going to spin good. There it goes. And then I'll go ahead and put all the rest of the wheels back in. And reassemble the watch. Well, actually, I think I put all the wheels back in, test it one more time to make sure it's all spinning correctly. And then I have to take it all apart again because the barrel bridge needs to go in first. So the process is the same every single time. So here we go. And I can't express how much I use my microscope. When I originally bought the microscope, I didn't know if I would ever use it or as much as I would use it, but I use it on every single movement the entire time I'm tearing down the movements and building them back up. And I promise you, this is the last time you'll have to see me take this movement apart. I'll show you guys a little test. trouble trying to figure out where to blow the air in order to get this thing to move, but there we go, right there. Everything is moving good, exactly the way it's supposed to. And then poof, it's all back together. I told you I wasn't going to make you watch it again. And then I do a little check to make sure everything's rolling correctly after I put all the screws back in. And it appears to be functioning good. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the click spring back in. I'm going to put a little grease inside. That's HP 1300 grease I'm going to put inside. And I'm going to very carefully press this thing back into place in order to make sure it doesn't shoot across my room. I've replaced a lot of these click springs in my day, and this probably was one of the more easily controllable click spring to get back into place and to not shoot across my room. But as you can see, I always have one hand on the spring, either the tool or the tweezers. But there you go. Click springs in place. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the crown wheel back together. It's got this little washer right here. Now I don't know if you need to do this, but I prefer to put a little bit of grease on the teeth of the crown wheel before I put it back in. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of the Bergeron 9504 grease, the blue stuff. I'm going to put a little bit of that at about 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 1 o'clock. Maybe a little bit more o'clocks. And hopefully the grease works its way down into the other parts. But most of the parts in the winding works of a pocket watch get a fair amount of use because they need to be wound every day, every other day. So I like to make sure that they're as friction free as possible. But I certainly don't like to bathe them in oil. I've seen movements that have oil dripping out of them. I'm going to put a little bit of the HP 1300 on the raceway here. And then the race goes on. And if you remember from the disassembly, this was a very large screw. And it's reverse threaded. So when you put it back on, you have to lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. Now I try to match up the screwdriver with the screw head and the slot in the screw, so I change screwdrivers very often. There we go, that one's tightened down. Do a little movement check to make sure it moves freely, which it does. And give it a nice ugga-dugga right there to make sure it doesn't come loose. Doing a little bit of showing off there. The next is the ratchet wheel. This is the part that rides on top of the barrel that winds up the spring, the mainspring. It's got a little square, the top of the arbor is square and it fits on the square part of the ratchet wheel. And I typically, the click screw and the ratchet wheel screw look a lot alike, but I can usually, on a pocket watch, since people have a tendency to wind the watch up sometimes with the ratchet wheel screw, it's usually the one that looks a little worse. People don't usually mess with the click screw, so that's how I chose which one of these screws went in which spot. But I'm about to put the click into place. Not having a very successful time at it. There we go. Make sure everything's nice and tight. And we're good. Now I'm going to flip the watch over, put the keyless works together. This little spring right here. Go ahead and put that on. Now a lot of the times I'll put screws together, and I'll put parts together and I'll put them back on the watch, but I won't tighten the screws down all the way. I'll go back and tighten them after I know they're in the right spot and I know everything's good. Then I'll go back and I'll tighten everything up. It seems to be the best way you can keep yourself from accidentally breaking something. Add some more grease. So the setting lever, the place where the setting lever goes, I put some HP 1300 on that, and more of the 9504, the blue stuff, will go inside here where these parts grind together. Having a issue trying to spin that, but for good reason, because I put the crown wheel on and that's attached to basically the spring. So I realized that I was doing that wrong and fixed it right there. And add a little bit more, and then I'm just going to move it around and squish it together to make sure they're on all the teeth. Now this all goes pretty good. And then trying to get the lever set in there was an absolute disaster. And at this point I can't even remember how I recorded it, so we're going to get to find out together. I remembered when I took this apart that this screw had like a little round top on it, so that's how I knew that this was the screw that went in here. Go. That looks good. That seems to be moving okay. So I'll tighten that down a little bit. Now I actually put this in the wrong spot. I go ahead and tighten that down a little bit. And this is where the majority of my frustration comes from, is putting this little spring onto the setting lever and getting the setting lever in place. I don't know if there's any graceful way to do this. And there we go. I edited it out because there was a lot of cursing and frustration and anger. But this is what it looks like at the end. The setting lever works, and I ended up moving that little spring to the other side of the little nub that sticks out there, and that's how it was supposed to go. So everything on this, I just wanted to add a little grease to where the two metal parts are rubbing together, and that's good. So it's time to put the pallet fork back in. So here comes one of those parts that I have such a difficult time videoing. I'm going to put the pallet fork in. It isn't the best video that I could ask for. I think at some point I realized that there was a capsule on the pallet fork bridge, and I had to stop and take the whole thing apart, clean it all, oil it, and put it all back together. And I believe I turned the watch around so that you guys can see me putting the last screw in, which was an absolute disaster. Except I dropped the screw directly into the hole. You'll get to see that in a second. So I spun the movement around, and we're going to get to put the other bridge screw in with the whole entire movement in my way, and just by luck, when I opened up the tweezers, it dropped right in the hole. You can't ask for better than that. And so what I'm going to do now, and I think I cut it out, but I will go ahead right here. I will go ahead and put the balance in. So I move the pallet fork up in the upper position, and when I rotate the balance in there, it's in the right spot, and the balance kicks right up. So in my opinion, this is the drop the mic moment for when you're doing a watch repair. When you put the balance in and it kicks right in and there's no issues, it's the best feeling. I'm doing my best right now to break it because I should be holding the pallet or the cock down with a tool before I put that screw in, because it's jiggling back and forth way too much. So it's always best to... Oh, it would appear that I'm having trouble getting it into the hole. It's hard to not giggle when I say stuff like that. Oh, I did want to say the reason why it was so dark in the last video, because I didn't have my microscope. I was trying to get you a better view, and without the light on the microscope, you can't see anything. So right now I'm lubing up the jewels, which I'm using 9 Bergeron 9010, I think. Yep, Bergeron 9010 oil to oil up all the jewels on the front and back, except for the big slow moving jewels, and I use HP 1300 for that one. So now I'm going to oil the dial side, and I'm going to get ready to reassemble it and put the dial back on. Put a little dab of oil on the post, and then put the cover back on and screw that down. Cannon pinion, and before I click it into place, I make sure it's not going to, the teeth aren't going to bang into each other. Now I'm going to put the dial on, screw down the 3 screws that hold the dial in place. Do the hour hand, put that in the middle. Currently I don't have a tool that actually has a big enough hole, so I'm going to push this down with 2 plastic tools so I don't mess it up. These guys go on pretty easily. Next comes the minute hand. Going to line that up. Currently the balance is not running. I've taken all the wind out of the watch so that I can take my time and do this and not have any of the hands move. The second hand comes next. Oh, sorry. I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure to make sure that this is attached to the minute wheel. Now I'm going to put the second hands in place. There we go. Going to give it a little wind to make sure it kicks right up. There we go, second hand's moving. Make sure that's on there tight. And it would look like everything's functioning correctly. So now it's time to put this into a case. I replaced the crystal in the case with a beautiful crystal I got off of eBay. We're going to put the 2 case screws in. If you don't know how to put a movement into a case, you have to pull the crown out to the setting position. Even though this is a lever set, you pull it out to the setting position, and that gives you enough room to actually slide the movement in there. Then you can get it in place, tighten down your case screws. Go ahead and put the back on. There we go. I'd like to thank you for watching the video. If you're still with me, please like and subscribe. Go out and visit www.meadewatchworks.com. We do a lot of custom watches.